Building a family can be a complicated, messy, lonely, and sometimes heartbreaking process. But you don't have to navigate this challenging journey alone.
Welcome to the All Paths podcast, where we support and celebrate all of the different ways there are to grow your family. We are your hosts, Kate and Emily from the nonprofit organization All Paths Family Building. And today we're talking with Becca about her journey and her work in this space. Becca, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. And before we get into your story in more detail, we'd love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. My name is Becca Levin Nayak. I am an attorney in the adoption and assisted reproduction space. I currently work at a firm called Hangley, Aronchek, Siegel, Pudlin, and Schiller in Philadelphia. And I practice in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So that's a little about me. I'm also a mom in a blended family with 3 kids. Austin, who's 10, and Ella and Bon, who are both 8.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. We will absolutely talk more about kind of your work as a professional in this space. But before we get to that, can you tell us a little bit about your journey to starting a family? Where did it all begin?
So my journey to starting a family was in the context of a same-sex relationship. So me and my then spouse, sort of embarked, and I knew it. I always knew I wanted to have children, and so we got to that point. And when you're building a family with 2 women, you have to sort of figure out how you're going to do that. And so I had known a physician in our area very well, Dr. Gutman at RMA Philadelphia, who assists a lot of LGBTQ plus families in the Philadelphia area. So I knew that, needed to make an appointment with Dr. Gutman, and then needed a source of sperm. So we looked at various sperm banks and, created sort of a chart. It's really overwhelming. It's sort of like going on dating apps, but in a whole different weird way. And so at the time, we created a matrix of some sort where we rated donors on, their personal interviews that were available, their health. There were certain criteria. We wanted the donor to have some Irish ancestry, which matched my spouse at the time's ancestry. So we did that and narrowed it down, and that's how we ultimately selected a donor. And so then proceeded with IUI. I was very fortunate, at least for the first pregnancy, that went all smoothly and resulted in the birth of my son, who is now 10, going on, seems like he's going on 20, but actually going on 11 in June.
That's great.
And I love a well-organized spreadsheet.
I know.
Matrix.
I was going to say, Emily was like, I support this 100%.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's how you would have approached it, Emily.
Well, it's
100%.
really overwhelming. I mean, there's so many choices out there, and you really need to find a way to narrow it down. And it's an interesting exercise. Like, do you care how tall the person is? Do you care what their childhood photos look like? Is that important? And so it really is an interesting exercise for those out there who need to find a source of sperm or eggs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm so happy, obviously, that you were successful and that process went smoothly. You kind of alluded to the fact that maybe it wasn't so smooth beyond that. So would you share a little bit?
So after I had my son, and that did go smoothly, there were a couple of other attempts to have a pregnancy, which resulted in a couple of miscarriages. And then that's sort of when my, not for that reason, but simultaneously, that relationship came to an end. And I sort of got to a space where I thought that I would be a single parent by choice to additional children. But I ended up meeting my current wife So I sort of, had to land from coming out of that marriage and orient myself. And before I could proceed down the path of maybe becoming a single parent by choice to a different children, I met my wife, who already had two children. She did intentional co-parenting. So she had also considered being a single mom by choice, but ended up finding a male couple who she decided to enter a co-parenting relationship with. So she already had two children and I had one, and very quickly came to realize that that was a good number of children to have in a combined household. And so that's sort of where my family building journey took a turn, an unexpected turn, and maybe not, I think at the time that was something that I was, I wasn't sure. I had always thought that I would have more than one child, but, I came to having three in a pretty unexpected way.
I think it's beautiful. Well, like I said, I mean, we truly do celebrate all the different ways you can become a parent and all the different ways you are a family and all the different constellations that looks like. And it's incredible and beautiful, and sometimes very challenging. To blend a family, I know is not easy, but it also is incredibly lovely to see the different relationships that develop. And but that it was a lot, I'm sure, to deal with, to experience loss, and also the end of your first marriage. That was, I'm sure, a lot to go through emotionally. So it sounds like you did the emotional work during those experiences before you met your current wife.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing journey.
For sure.
And the relationships that you enter into help sort of shape where you land. Had I met my wife pretty soon after my first marriage ended, and maybe if I had met her further down the line, things would have gone on a different path. But at the time, her children were under two. My son they're 2 years apart, so he was like, they were close to two and he was close to four. And everyone was really, really little.
Yeah.
That's a lot of toddlers in one
Yeah,
house.
that was a lot of little people.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm interested in like how you guys have talked about family over the years. Can you share a little bit about?
Because we have very different families, me and my wife. I mean, our children came into the world in very different ways. And gosh, you probably can help me there's a book. I think it's like the All Families book or something about making families with, do you know the name of that book?
I think The Family Book by Todd Parr.
No, different one.
Oh, different one. I love that book.
Baby Making for Every, no.
What Makes a Baby?
Yeah, I think it's that book. Because
we love that book too.
It's a really great book because yes, it works for everybody. That we can, when our kids were younger, we would read books together every night. And that was one of the books that we would read. And it was really interesting that, it worked for a child that had, a sperm donor and two moms. And that it also worked for twins who had, a mom and also two dads. And so I really think that book was very good at explaining, how you make a baby, and, that genetic ties aren't what make a family. And that, who, I like the part where it was like, who was excited or waiting for you, and has all these different, characters that are not necessarily, maybe some of them look non-binary. And so I thought it was a really good book to explain to the kids at a very young age how they came into the world.
That's really lovely. People are always asking for recommendations of ways to explain, especially for really little kids, like the fact that families can be what you make it.
Yes.
It's not this very rigid structure that you might see in some other books or in the media.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So how has that relationship or those relationships evolved as the kids have gotten older?
The relationships with each other, or the relationships, I mean, it's definitely an evolving thing. It's sort of hard to compare because I think every family has challenges. Somebody might be unhappy with somebody else because they took their toy or messed something up. And it's hard to compare what that's like in a blended family as compared to not a blended family. I'm sure all families have similar types of, day-to-day like unhappiness that comes with parenting. And so there's really not anything to compare it to. But I think that, it's nice to see the kids, all growing up together in the same space and really sharing experiences with each other. They all go to the same school. And honoring sort of each other's different family structures and relationships. And it's nice to see, like, my son has a relationship with Ella and Vaughn's other parents. And so that's nice to see as well. It's definitely part of the it takes a village type of mentality where, everyone is able to, if they're, I know that if I'm really stuck and we don't have childcare after school, that the guys, as we call them, that they will be there if we need extra help for any of the kids, including my son.
That's so great. Well, one thing that you and I have in common, Becca, is that we both have advocated for parentage reform. And one of the things that struck me when I was advocating for that was, obviously we would get some pushback just about, the diversity of families and the size of families and the number of parents. And I was always like, I don't see a downside to more loving people in children's lives. Obviously, if the people are good and they improve the lives of the children, this is a wonderful thing. This is like a bigger village, and not everyone has a parental role, but for those that do, it is such a richness, and it makes the family's life, fuller and really wonderful. So I think your family, I feel, is a testament to that.
Oh, well, thank you.
It can be such a positive thing to have more people involved. And like you said too about the children's books that you read, to me, it's like, what kid doesn't want to hear how wanted they were? How planfully they were brought into the world and how wanted they were is a really lovely thing that kids can hear at every age. And I wish every child did hear that at every age. I think that is so lovely. So can you share a little bit about kind of how your own family did or didn't, or how it impacted your specific specialty in law or your career in general?
Yeah, well, I think as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, I think that impacted just my entire walk through life as an adult. When the choice I made to go to law school was because I wanted to do LGBT advocacy. At the time, I sort of remember there was like this moment that I remember exactly where I was standing in grad school. I got my master's in public administration, and I remember being in the building of my master's program in Syracuse. Actually, I know your child's going to Syracuse. Go Syracuse. At the time, it was about 2003. And the Lawrence v. Texas decision had just come down from the United States Supreme Court, which essentially decriminalized same-sex intimate relationships. And I saw that a lot of the work I had more of a policy slant to my work sort of leading up until that point. And I saw that a lot of the changes that were being made to achieve progress for the LGBT community were being made in the courts. So I sort of in that moment decided maybe I should check out what this law is all about. And I audited a couple of law school classes while I was getting my master's, and then decided to make the shift to go to law school. And at that point, I did that because I wanted to do LGBT advocacy. So I then went to law school. I had a wonderful professor there, Nancy Polikoff, who taught our family law classes. But she was really involved in a lot of work for the LGBT community and families in general. She, at the time that I was there, was working on a book called Beyond Marriage. And it was talking about why is marriage the structure for deciding who has rights and benefits, that there are a lot of important relationships that are there in the world, such as, adult child might be taking care of their parents. And wouldn't it be great if they could provide health insurance for that? So she was really looking at how do we form and structure families. So her work really focused on the family, families. And so I was like looking at LGBT advocacy with regard to families. And so when I graduated from law school, I wanted to go to a law firm that would allow me to work for the LGBT community. So at that time, I graduated in 2008. And there, was at that time a lot of work. We were seeing the first marriage, states coming and having marriage, like Massachusetts was the first. We saw a lot of civil unions, domestic partnerships, other legal statuses for same-sex relationships. And it was really an evolving time early in my career. I saw that, some of the cases that I was handling were things like couples who had went to a state that had marriage, and then they came back to Pennsylvania and they could not dissolve their marriage. Or I had families who had structured their lives as a married couple would, with sharing assets, with sharing children, but didn't have the legal protection of any recognition, and then untangling those relationships financially. And then, of course, in my view, most importantly, how when both people were not legal parents to their children, how a relationship with the non-biological or genetic parent was maintained. And so that was really, a very shifting landscape. I remember we used to do these, I still do them. There's a conference that our local LGBT family group called Philadelphia Family Pride. They put on a conference every year. And so I always do the legal update. And I remember every year there was a little bit of difference, and then we had the court cases starting to come out. So we had Windsor case, which gave recognition to same-sex couples for the federal government. So then we were like, well, here are the rights you do have, but here's what you still don't have because of the state you might live in. And then, ultimately with Obergefell, there was marriage equality throughout. So that's how I came to sort of the LGBT work. And then I came to more of a focus on the assisted reproduction work, where I was working with a fantastic attorney who's now a judge, Tiffany Palmer. She's now a judge in the Philadelphia Court of Family Pleas. But when she became a judge, she had been the attorney at our firm handling the assisted reproduction and adoption cases. So when she left, I was able to move over to that practice area and found that that's really, something I love. I love being able to help families with the legal documents and protections that they need to form. And that's something that's really fulfilling.
That's wonderful. So did that come before your advocacy work, or did they kind of evolve at the same time? Were you always an active advocate throughout?
I would say that I've always had, an ear to advocacy, but this is the first opportunity, I feel like, where I really think that there's a law that we can advocate for and actually get passed. And so I think that there's a good opportunity with our current legislature, which hasn't necessarily been there in the past or for other issues. I think the idea that, children's relationships with their parents should be legally secure is pretty basic. And so I think that is something that I hope that everybody, of all parties can get behind, the idea that we need to have very clear laws to make sure we know who a child's parents are, who is going to be responsible for the child, for all the different ways that a child might come into the world, especially with the use of assisted reproduction.
Yes. I mean, I think some people who don't recognize that as important are people who took it for granted and never had to fight for it, so I think I obviously agree with you that it's very important and fundamental. And often it just starts with raising awareness of the fact that this is important and that our state hasn't updated it, that it doesn't reflect the diversity of families today.
Yeah, and I think that is something so true, that if someone's not had to deal with it, their eyes may not be open to it. There's one attorney who's been tremendous in advocating for it, and he is, a man in a, opposite sex marriage. But he had to use IVF to create his family. And I think that it opened his eyes to say, okay, we needed this type of help to build our family. If we had needed a sperm donor or an egg donor or an embryo donor or a surrogate, we would have, done those things to form our family. And I think just having the experience of needing to use assisted reproduction in some form can open people's eyes, because when you read some of the material from groups who are opposed to bills like the legislation based on the Uniform Parentage Act, there seems to be some idea that children should be conceived naturally, and naturally meaning through intercourse, which isn't possible for everybody. And it just seems very blind to the experiences that so many families have.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you guys call it the Pennsylvania Parentage Act?
So, I mean, technically it's House Bill 350. And so I feel like we call it the House Bill 350.
That's great.
We have a website, and the website is Penn Parentage. I like to call it the PAUPA. I think that has like a nice ring, like putting the PA in the UPA. So we'll see what catches on.
Yeah, I love that. And how are things going?
So the bill, the supporters of the bill came together late in last session. This has been a bill that had sort of been introduced session after session with no one really paying attention to it. And then a group of attorneys formed the Parentage Committee of the State Bar. We really sort of started to take a more serious look at this bill and say, okay, this is a bill that's been introduced and reintroduced. How can we take a look at it, go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and tailor it to the needs of Pennsylvania families? So we did that. At the same time, we connected with our uniform law commissioner, who's been a tremendous advocate for the bill and really knows how to move legislation through the process, which is something that we as attorneys, that's not part of our job. We, work with the law that we have, but we're not, at least, practicing attorneys who aren't working in a legislative body or as a lobbyist. We're not as used to getting legislation passed. And so when we connected with the ULC commissioner, who really had a lot of experience in moving and passing legislation, that was sort of the missing piece that came together. And so we did come together pretty late last legislative session. So last legislative session, the bill passed the House, but then it was too late for the Senate to really take any action on it. So this new session that we started in January, and our sessions go 2 years, we were really able to bring this forward more mindfully and really give it the time and attention that the legislatures need to pass it. And so this session, we reintroduced the bill. There was a hearing on it in the House in April. And so we were able to field questions from different representatives, re-met with some representatives who had more questions. In May, there was a hearing in the Children and Youth Committee. That bill passed out of committee with bipartisan support and went to the House floor, where it again passed with bipartisan support. Yes.
That's awesome.
And now it went over to the Senate. Everyone was on recess for the summer, and right now they're working on our budget in Pennsylvania. So we're waiting for them to consider this bill. It's in the Senate Judiciary Committee is the committee that it's going to come out of. And so we've been hearing support for the bill from both parties. If it is voted on and makes it out of committee, then it would go to the Senate floor for a vote. So we're very optimistic that there might be some movement on this bill in the next few months. If it's going to happen this session, the next few months are a really important time. And so what people can do, what we're looking for now, what we've been doing is collecting stories from people. So we've been gathering stories from people who have formed their family through assisted reproduction, whether it's been with the help of an egg donor, embryo donor, sperm donor, gestational carrier. And we're seeking stories not just from intended parents, but also people who have served as donors and gestational carriers. And so we've had really beautiful stories that we're compiling, and really, need people from all parts of the state to share their story. But one theme's really emerged in surrogacy in particular, there's really been this theme of, women helping women and people coming together to form their families. And it's all been really positive and really it's really nice to hear these stories because a lot of times, we don't always get the full story of what the relationships are like between people and how they've come to need help through assisted reproduction to build their family.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
If somebody wanted to share their story, how can they get in touch, or how should they?
Yeah, so we have
go
the
about doing that?
Pennsylvania Parentage Coalition that if you go on the website and Google that website, or
We'll put a link in the show notes too.
Yeah, you can go on and share your story there. And if you want to share your story through an interview, you can indicate that there that you want to share your story. And then if it's, if you don't want to share your story, but you do want to help advance the bill, we need people to call their state senators in Pennsylvania and tell them that they want to see House Bill 350 passed.
Wonderful. Oh, that's awesome. I hope you get a lot of folks sharing their stories.
So.
I mean, as somebody who gets the great privilege of getting to listen to people's stories all the time on this podcast, it is really lovely kind of getting a peek behind the scenes and hearing about, everyone's different life experiences and where they're coming from.
Yeah, and that's really such a powerful tool.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm hopeful, but there are groups that, that oppose it, which is interesting to me that, I think some of it has to do with confusion about what assisted reproduction is and what surrogacy is. And that, in surrogacy, we are not paying for a child and really educating what surrogacy is. And so it's definitely been an eye-opening experience because day to day, I'm just working with my clients, trying to get, them the legal protections they need to make sure that they have a, contract to move forward with assisted reproduction. And then once there's a pregnancy achieved, getting a court order that also secures their parental rights. And so to see, people looking at this type of arrangement with a lot of question marks tells me that there's a lot of education we need to do about what assisted reproduction is, what a donor is, and who surrogates are.
Yeah. And hopefully all these stories that you're collecting will go a long way to educating folks around these different paths to parenthood and, really putting faces to what for some might be kind of abstract medical concepts.
Yeah. Even though we don't have, Pennsylvania is a state that doesn't have a statute. So we have no law on our books that says who is a parent of assisted reproduction. But in the absence of that, we've had a lot of court decisions that have given us clarity. So, these things are happening, these arrangements are happening in Pennsylvania for families today. But the reason that we want to have a statute to support it is to make things easier for everybody, to make things, right now when I'm explaining to clients why they are a parent, I have to explain, about 3 court decisions to them. And I would much rather be able to point to a single sentence in a Pennsylvania statute that says, this is who a parent is. We already have surrogacy in Pennsylvania. We've had it for 30-ish years. Our Department of Health put out guidance about 30 years ago to say how birth certificates should be issued for children born to gestational carriers. So this is what have been doing for decades, but we want to make it easier. And we want to make sure that there's uniformity, that someone does not have to guess what a particular judge may or may not do if if they have something unusual in their case, if they have, or even not unusual. I recently had a new judge who needed to be educated about donors, and that even if someone's using an egg donor, that the intended parents are legal parents. And so that's something where, again, if we had a statute that we could point to, it would make things a lot clearer for families and for our courts.
Yeah, and that's where, sometimes if people didn't necessarily buy into the family argument, which to me is the most important argument, and the protections for children argument, which is the most important argument, some liked to hear that the court system was going to be more efficient and that there was going to be more
Yes.
clarity for judges and families and attorneys alike. And we were kind of like, whatever lane gets you to passing this legislation, they are all benefits of a updated, clear, comprehensive statute.
Yes, yes. And I know, Kate, you had your own experience in Massachusetts after many, many years getting this finally passed. But I say this to our legislatures and other people that when it was passed in Massachusetts, it ended up being unanimous, which I think is incredible that everybody, once all the questions and once they were educated, that it passed unanimously, right, from both of your houses.
Yes, thank goodness. Yeah. But it was, as you know, a lot of work went into getting there and a lot of time, but I'm hoping each state is a little bit easier, and Massachusetts obviously wasn't first, but that every state who passes this, I hope leaves a smoother road behind us for the next state.
Yeah, and I think that's, happening because you are seeing, more states, just in the past year or so. I think Massachusetts, Michigan, Hawaii, there's definitely a trend. And so as more and more states pass this, maybe other states will see that this is not something unique or novel. We're really just trying to have uniformity throughout the country, really, because this is a uniform law to make sure that people aren't in one state and their parents, and then they move to a different state and they're not quite sure, or if they end up in court in that state, second state, it just makes sure that people can travel easily and not have to worry about their parental rights being disturbed.
Absolutely. Well, as you know, I am not an attorney, but if I were, I think I would want to be a family formation attorney. And I know you do a lot of different work, but a lot of your work is family formation now. And I just think it's so, it's so lovely and exciting to help grow families in the many different ways they can be grown. It's just so lovely. And to protect their families' rights is such important work. What do you find like most rewarding? What are your best days of your job?
Well, I always love the baby pictures. That's always fun. When every time, when a baby's born and I get to see, the family sends me a picture of them, usually the first day their baby was born, holding the baby. And it's just so fulfilling. I, get those emails and I send them to my team at my office, and it makes everybody's day. And then we have a bulletin board here where my staff just started like printing out color copies of these when we get them. So we're getting a nice collection of pictures of babies entering the world. So those are good days. Other good days, I go to court a lot to do confirmatory adoptions for a lot of LGBTQ plus families. And other families as well who build their families with assisted reproduction. And so those are fun days too in Philadelphia, where I'm located. And so I have a lot of adoptions in Philadelphia. And they'll usually schedule me all for one day. So last month, I think that I had 11 adoptions in one day. And it was just like,
Wow.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And, everyone's there for the same thing. And so it's nice to see the families, get an opportunity to meet each other, see each other and say like, okay, we're all here to make sure that our families are secure. And even though for those type of adoptions, there's a mixed feeling. There is some frustration that there's a need to confirm parental rights through an adoption. That need is largely based in discrimination. And so there's some frustration with having to do that. There's also some, relief that there is an opportunity to do that, because that has not always been the case, even going back, before marriage equality. Sometimes, some states had a requirement that people be married in order to do an adoption. And so we've had second parent adoption in Pennsylvania for a long time, but having an avenue to legally secure any vulnerabilities in a parent-child relationship is something that I think people appreciate. So it's a mix of, annoyance, but also happiness. But by the time we're there on adoption day, I think everyone's pretty happy and excited. We take pictures with the judge, and it ends up being, I think, hopefully a feel good event.
Yeah, well, I remember you sharing about that when I met you, and I was struck by how I think it must be great for the families that you do recognize, obviously, those the range of emotions that they can feel throughout the process. But as you said, usually by then they had to do this unfortunately they had to do this, which other families, again, probably take for granted. But by the end, they make that day kind of celebratory, and it's at a minimum the close of that particular chapter, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's nice when it's used as an opportunity to celebrate the family. Usually people are going to lunch afterwards. Sometimes people are bringing friends and family to, come and be part of it. So it can be a really nice occasion.
Yeah, making lemonade out of lemons.
Mm-hmm.
That's really wonderful. So, what is one thing that you would say to somebody who is just starting to grow their family? That's a question we ask for a lot of people, but I don't know if you have any particular recommendations from the legal side of things. A lot of times I feel like people talk to their personal experience, which you're welcome to do, but also since you work with families who are growing every day, if there's like a checklist of things that you say, like, okay, every family, we should start here.
Yeah, I think that if you're creating a family with the use of assisted reproduction, I think it's not a bad idea to speak with an attorney early on in the process just to make sure that you have the correct information as to what extra steps, if any, need to happen. And so I think I give free consultations. I think a lot of my colleagues in this space also do that, or maybe have mini consultations where you can just know what it is you need. So if you're using, for example, a sperm donor and might try at-home insemination, is pulling up a contract online, is that going to provide the protection that you need? Why or why not? Does it make a difference? So some states it makes a difference whether you do at-home insemination or work with a physician in terms of the legal protections that it provides. And so sort of having some of those questions answered. If someone's using a known egg donor, a lot of times the fertility clinics are pretty good when there is the need for a fertility clinic to be involved in directing people to us as attorneys to talk about, okay, if you have a known egg donor, but you're going to carry the pregnancy, for example, is it necessary to terminate the rights of that donor or not? Is that proceeding with a higher level of caution than is necessary or not? And a lot of times I have those discussions and people, I give them the facts, and then they will make a decision based on what their comfort level is.
And that's such a good point. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Like one scenario that I see a lot in this, also has to do with how my own family was structured is, intentional co-parenting. And when that presents to a physician's office, sometimes the paperwork that's signed at the physician's office makes the male co-parent look like a sperm donor. And so just sort of, really talking about, and then there's also, so many ways that people can form their families, like for a co-parenting situation. Maybe one person is going to take a more active role. Maybe that's how they envision it. But is that person a parent? The second person, are they a parent or are they a donor? And so, because a lot of times you'd be surprised, I think, how many times I have people coming to me and they're describing what they want. And, an involved sperm donor, like a sperm donor that stays in contact with a child, can in some ways look similar to a co-parenting situation where you have one person who's going to take a less active role. And so really thinking about like what, because legally someone's a parent or they're not a parent. People can have all sorts of different relationships with children that come into the world, but the law really does see people as bright line. Either you're a parent or you're not a parent. And so that's, a lot of education and conversations about, well, in these type of parenting situations, which side of the line do you want to be on? Are you going to be on the parent side or the donor side?
That's a really good point.
Yeah. Another thing I think is embryo disposition, like especially if a
Mm.
relationship ends. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of times people maybe are starting out with fertility treatment and they're signing those consent forms at the clinic. And of course, you don't really want to think about breaking up or talk about breaking up. But as we know, people break up. LGBTQ couples break up, heterosexual couples break up. There's a lot of different,
Yeah.
and then if you've only created embryos, then you have a complex situation in the future and maybe less options potentially.
Yeah, that's really important too. I would say, yes, if you're being given a stack of papers and regarding embryo disposition, really taking the time to read them and think through, okay, if I was in this scenario, what would be required? And does this form that might be a checkbox form, do the checkboxes actually match my intentions? Is there something here that maybe is not a checkbox form? Maybe what I want is not one of the three checkboxes. And so, thinking that through, having a conversation with your partner, because it can be really complicated. When people are married, a lot of times these issues are coming to the courts through a divorce. Depending on the state that you live in, a divorce could take a long time, well over a year in many places. And so having to wait that long to move on with your family building could be a big challenge for some people where time is a factor. And then for people who are not married and creating embryos, it can even be more complicated because as bad as it might be to have this as an issue in a divorce, at least there's a court forum that's used to dealing with family relationships. When people are not married, they might find themselves in civil court, which is not designed for this type of issue. A lot of business disputes are going to civil court, and this type of issue could take a really long time and be really expensive to have to resolve through court.
That's a good point. I haven't thought of that piece of things. It just you aren't able to access the correct court system that you need to actually be surrounded by people who understand all the legalities around it.
Yeah.
So yeah, excellent reason to consult with an attorney before you start any of this. That
Yeah.
all of the information that you don't even know is missing, you're able to get and to work through.
The other thing people ask me sometimes are like, what do you wish you knew or thought about before you started building your family? And I think when, especially for people using donors, thinking about, I feel like when I selected a donor, gave a lot of thought about who the donor might be or was, or what access there would be to that person. What I didn't think of so much was donor siblings and how many and what those relationships would be like. And so that's something that as my son's getting older and we're discovering that there are donor siblings out there, that's really a relationship that I wish I had given more thought to than I had, because I was very focused on having a child. I was thinking about who the donor was, but those other relationships that are really sort of cool and important, giving a lot of foresight to those as well. I really give my clients, some of them, a lot of credit when they're looking at, known donors, or I'm starting to see some services that are really limiting the number of family groups that might be related to the same donor. And so I think really taking the time to think about all aspects, that's something definitely that I didn't think of as much when I was building my family.
Do you have any, whether from kind of your own lived experience or legally, do you have any suggestions around best practices that people should be?
Yeah, I think that for each person, I think just being aware of the issue. I would not say, certainly the more children related to the same donor out there, the more complexity there might be. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't go to one of the major cryobanks to, if that's where you're going to go to purchase sperm, but just having an awareness of what does that mean and what does that look like? And maybe talking to people who have been down that road before and have children who are old enough to think about those issues or over 18. And for some people, they might never decide to meet the donor or any donor siblings. And that might be an experience that a child makes that decision for themselves as they get older, or, and also for parents, I would say also introducing those, thinking about at what age they want to introduce those dynamics. Is that something that they're going to join all of the donor groups when their child is 1 year old? And isn't making those decisions or verbalizing anything about those relationships, or are they going to make that decision, when their child tells them that they're interested? Are they, going to leave that for after 18? So it's definitely something to give more thought to. And I think it's something that maybe people oftentimes skip over. Maybe as more families are being formed in this way, it's something that people will think about it more and talk to their friends and family and other people who have done it. But that's definitely something that I didn't give as much thought to as other things in the family building process.
Yeah, I appreciate you raising that. Definitely.
So the flip side to that question about what would you say to somebody who's just starting to grow their family is, what is one thing that you wish people would stop saying when someone shares that they are starting on this journey?
I think maybe it's not so much of one thing that people shouldn't say, but I would say, like, leave all your assumptions at the door. Don't assume that anybody is having any particular experience or that their family is composed of something, a normative family structure, that you really don't want to assume anyone's coming in with a certain type of family or a certain type of experience or a certain type of ease. That really, I would say, not asking questions that are formed based on certain assumptions.
I love that.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for talking with us today, Becca. It's been really lovely getting to know more about your own story and your professional work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you'll join us next time for more family building stories and resources. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. And follow us on social media at allpathsfb, or visit our website, allpathsfb.org, for more information about our work. All Paths Family Building is so grateful to the members of our circle of support who are vital to our ability to provide emotional support, education, and advocacy that is open to anyone struggling to grow their families. Today, we want to recognize and thank the Center for Advanced Reproductive Services, a FIRST fertility center. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please help spread the word so that anyone who is struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. It's an honor to walk with you on your family building journey.